My grandmother made us all promise something at her deathbed. I was the only one who kept it. 3 years later, a lawyer found me. Grandma Eloise was 87 when the cancer finally won. She'd been fighting for 14 months, longer than anyone expected. Stubborn until the end. The whole family gathered in her hospice room that final afternoon. My parents, my uncle, my 2 cousins. We stood in a half circle around her bed like mourners who hadn't yet earned the title. She made each of us promise one thing. Different promises for different people. When she got to me, her voice was barely a whisper. Her fingers, cold and paper thin, gripped my wrist. "Visit my grave every month," she said. "Bring yellow tulips. Talk to me like I'm still here." I nodded, tears streaming. "Of course, Grandma." My cousin Daphne promised to finish her nursing degree. My uncle promised to reconcile with his estranged son. My mom promised to stop enabling my father's drinking. Dad promised to get sober entirely. 3 years later, I was the only one who kept my word. Daphne dropped out after 1 semester. My uncle never made that phone call. Mom still covered for Dad, and Dad still drank himself unconscious every weekend. But every month, rain or shine, I drove 45 minutes to Meadowbrook Cemetery with a bouquet of yellow tulips. I'd sit on the bench beside her headstone and talk about my job, about my failed relationships, about how disappointed she'd be in everyone else. Sometimes I cried, sometimes I laughed. An elderly groundskeeper named Theodore started recognizing me. He'd wave from his golf cart and leave me in peace. The lawyer found me on a Tuesday afternoon. I was leaving work when a woman in a gray suit approached my car. "Are you Corinne Walsh?" she asked. I nodded, already suspicious. "My name is Marguerite Vance. I represent your late grandmother's estate." She handed me a business card. "We need to talk about her secondary will." I stared at her. "Secondary will?" she explained in the parking lot. Grandma had created 2 wills. The first was read immediately after her death. Standard distribution. House to my uncle. Savings split between her children. Jewelry divided among the grandchildren. But the second will was different. It was sealed with specific instructions. Open only after 3 years. Distribute only to family members who kept their promises. "Your grandmother hired a private investigator," Marguerite said carefully. "He's been monitoring all of you since her death." My stomach dropped. "Monitoring us?" "Cemetery logs, phone records, public documents." She paused. "You're the only one who fulfilled your promise, Corinne. The only one who visited her grave consistently for 3 years." I couldn't speak. Grandma had tested us. From beyond the grave, she'd set up an elaborate system to see who actually meant their promises and who was just performing grief for an audience. "What was in the secondary will?" I finally asked. Marguerite's expression shifted, something between sympathy and discomfort. "That's what we need to discuss privately. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning?" I agreed. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Grandma's grip on my wrist, the way she'd looked at me differently than the others, like she already knew. The next morning, I arrived at Marguerite's office at 9 a.m. sharp. She led me to a conference room where a thick folder sat on the mahogany table. "Before I open this," she said, "I need you to understand something. What's inside will change your family permanently. Your grandmother knew that. She wanted it that way." She slid the folder toward me. I opened it with trembling hands. The first page was a letter in Grandma's handwriting. The second page was a property deed. The third was a birth certificate I'd never seen before. A birth certificate with my father's name listed as the child. But the mother's name wasn't my grandmother. The name on the certificate read Vivian Cordero. I stared at it for what felt like hours. The date of birth matched my father's. The location was correct. But everything I knew about my family history crumbled in my hands. "I don't understand," I finally said. "My grandmother raised my father. There are photos of her pregnant. She talked about his birth all the time." Marguerite nodded slowly. "Your grandmother anticipated this confusion. That's why she wrote you this letter." She gestured to the handwritten pages. I picked them up, my hand still trembling, and began to read. "My dearest Corinne, if you're reading this, then you kept your promise. I knew you would. You were always the honest one, the loyal one. That's why I'm trusting you with the truth. Your father is not my biological son. In 1962, I was 24 years old and desperate for a child. Your grandfather and I had been trying for 3 years with no success. The doctors told me my chances were slim. I fell into a deep depression that nearly ended my marriage. My sister Vivian had the opposite problem. She was 19, unmarried, and pregnant by a man who wanted nothing to do with her. In those days, that kind of scandal destroyed families. Our parents gave her 2 choices: give up the baby or leave forever. She chose to give me her son. We staged everything. I wore padding under my dresses for months. Vivian hid in our parents' summer cottage until she delivered. On April 14th, 1962, I held your father for the first time and pretended he'd come from my body. Vivian left for California 3 days later. I never saw her again. For 60 years, I kept the secret. Your grandfather took it to his grave in 1998. I planned to take it to mine. But then the cancer came, and I started thinking about what I was leaving behind. Lies, Corinne. I was leaving behind lies. The property deed in this folder is for a house in Monterey, California. Vivian's house. She passed away in 2019, but she left everything to the child she never got to raise. The child who doesn't know she existed. Your father inherited a fortune from a mother he never knew he had. But here's where it gets complicated. Vivian had conditions in her will too. The inheritance can only pass to your father if he's maintained sobriety for at least 1 year. She knew about his drinking. She hired investigators just like I did. She watched from a distance for decades, waiting for him to become the man she hoped he'd be. He never did. If your father fails the sobriety requirement, the inheritance passes to his children instead, equally divided. but only to those children who demonstrate what Vivian called moral character worthy of the Cordero name. That's you, Corinne. Just you. Daphne broke her promise within months. Your father never even tried. But you drove 45 minutes every month for 3 years to bring flowers to an old woman's grave. You talked to me like I could still hear you. And honestly, sweetheart, I think I could. The inheritance is substantial. The house alone is worth $2.3 million. There are also investment accounts, a vintage car collection, and a storage unit full of family heirlooms that belong to you now. But that's not why I'm writing this letter. I'm writing because you deserve to know who you really are. You deserve to know why you've always felt like the outsider in our family, why you never quite fit. Vivian had a gift. She could see through people. She knew who was genuine and who was performing. She saw it in faces, in gestures, in the small moments others missed. I watched her predict divorces at weddings. I watched her identify liars in seconds. People called her strange. Our parents called her difficult. But she was never wrong. You have that gift, Corinne. I've watched you use it your whole life without even knowing what it was. You knew your father was an alcoholic before anyone admitted it. You knew your mother was unhappy years before she started sleeping in the guest room. You knew Daphne would drop out of nursing school because you saw the fear behind her smile. That intuition isn't random, it's genetic. It's Vivian's blood running through your veins. I'm sorry I lied to you. I'm sorry I lied to everyone. But I hope this letter explains why I chose you to carry this burden. You're the only one strong enough to handle the truth, and the truth is messy. What you do with it is up to you. Tell your father, or don't. Share the inheritance, or keep it. Reach out to Vivian's remaining family, or let them stay strangers. I won't judge you from wherever I am. I just wanted you to have the choice I never gave anyone else. Visit me one more time, Corinne. Bring yellow tulips. Tell me what you've decided. I think I'll be able to hear you. All my love, Grandma Eloise. I set down the letter. My vision was blurry. I hadn't realized I was crying until a tear splashed onto the mahogany table. Marguerite sat quietly, letting me process. She'd clearly read the letter before, maybe multiple times. How much? I finally asked. Total. How much is the inheritance? She opened a separate folder. The Monterey property is valued at $2.4 million. The investment accounts contain approximately $1.8 million in diversified assets. The car collection includes a 1967 Shelby GT500, a 1959 Porsche 356, and 3 other vintage vehicles worth collectively around $400,000. The storage unit contents are harder to value, but preliminary estimates suggest another $200,000 in antiques and artwork. I did the math in my head. Nearly $5 million. And this all goes to me? Just me? Under the terms of both wills, yes. Your grandmother's secondary will designated the Cordero inheritance to pass through your father only if he met certain conditions. He didn't. The inheritance then passes to qualifying grandchildren. Your cousin Daphne failed her promise condition. You're the only remaining eligible heir. I thought about my father, drunk on the couch every weekend. My mother covering for him, making excuses, hiding bottles from dinner guests. 3 years ago, he'd held Grandma's hand and promised to get sober. He'd cried, real tears, and then he'd stopped at a liquor store on the way home from her funeral. Does my father know about any of this? About Vivian? Marguerite shook her head. Your grandmother's instructions were explicit. The truth about his adoption was to be revealed only to the person who kept their promise. That person decides what happens next. So Grandma had given me more than money. She'd given me power. The power to reshape my entire family's understanding of itself. The power to give my father a fortune, or keep it for myself. The power to expose a 60-year lie or let it die with me. I need time, I said. Marguerite nodded. Of course. But I should mention one more thing. She pulled a photograph from the folder. This is Vivian, taken in 1995. I looked at the woman in the picture. She was in her 50s, standing on a beach with the ocean behind her. Her hair was dark and curly, shot through with gray. Her eyes were sharp and knowing. Her smile was small, almost secretive. She looked exactly like me. Not like my father, not like my grandmother, like me. The same jawline, the same slightly crooked nose, the same way of tilting her head. Genetics are strange, Marguerite said softly. Sometimes they skip a generation. I drove home in a daze. My apartment felt smaller than before, cheaper. I made tea I didn't drink and sat on my couch staring at the wall until the sun went down. My phone buzzed. A text from my mother. Dinner Sunday? Dad's doing better. 6 weeks sober. 6 weeks. After promising Grandma he'd quit entirely. After 3 years of chances. He'd managed 6 weeks and my mother was treating it like a miracle. I didn't respond. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Meadowbrook Cemetery. Theodore waved from his golf cart as I walked through the gates. I'd forgotten flowers, but it didn't matter. I sat on the bench beside Grandma's headstone and talked. I read your letter, I said out loud. I don't know what to do. You knew I wouldn't know what to do. That's why you chose me, isn't it? Because you knew I'd actually struggle with this instead of just taking the money and running. A bird landed on the headstone. Sparrow, I think. It stared at me with black eyes. Dad doesn't deserve it. You know that. He broke his promise before your body was even cold. But he's still my father. He's still the man who taught me to ride a bike and helped me with my math homework when I was 8. Does that count for anything? Does the good stuff balance out the bad? The sparrow flew away. No answers from beyond the grave. And Mom, she broke her promise too. She's still covering for him, still pretending everything's fine. But she's also the one who sat with me when I had nightmares. She made my Halloween costumes by hand until I was 12. She cried at my graduation. I pulled out the photograph of Vivian. But she's not really my grandmother, is she? Not genetically. And you're not really my grandmother either. You're my great-aunt who raised a stolen baby and lied about it for 60 years. I traced Vivian's face with my finger. Except you did raise him. You were there for every birthday and every illness and every failure. Doesn't that count for more than blood? Doesn't the woman who shows up matter more than the woman who gave birth? I stayed at the cemetery for 3 hours. By the time I left, I had the beginning of a plan. It took me 2 weeks to gather what I needed. Marguerite helped with the legal documents. I made copies of everything important. And then I drove to my parents' house on a Thursday evening, unannounced. Mom answered the door with a smile that faltered when she saw my expression. Corinne, we weren't expecting you. Is everything okay? We need to talk, I said. All of us. Together. She glanced back into the house. I knew she was calculating whether Dad was sober enough for company. Your father's resting. Can this wait until… No, it can't. Something in my voice made her step aside. I walked through the familiar living room, past the photos on the mantel, past the couch where Dad usually passed out by 9. He was in the kitchen, surprisingly upright, nursing a cup of coffee. Corinne, he sounded tired. Your mother said dinner was Sunday. This isn't about dinner. I sat down at the kitchen table. The same table where we'd eaten Thanksgiving meals and birthday cakes and quiet breakfasts full of things no one said out loud. My parents exchanged nervous looks but sat down across from me. I placed the folder on the table. 3 years ago, I said, Grandma asked each of us to make a promise. Do you remember what yours were? Mom's face tightened. Dad looked away. Your mother promised to stop enabling Dad's drinking. Dad promised to get sober. Neither of you did. Now wait a minute. Dad started. I'm not finished. My voice was harder than I expected. You made those promises while she was dying. You held her hand and looked her in the eye and swore you would change. And then you went home and poured yourself a drink, Dad. That same night. I know because I was there. Mom reached for Dad's hand. He pulled away. Corinne, you don't understand how difficult. I understand perfectly. I understand that promises to a dying woman meant nothing to either of you. I understand that you performed grief at her funeral and forgot about her within a week. I understand that I drove to her grave every single month for 3 years while you couldn't be bothered to visit once. Dad's face reddened. Anger or shame, hard to tell. I don't have to sit here and… Yes, you do. I opened the folder. Because Grandma left a secondary will, one that was only opened after 3 years. One that was only distributed to people who kept their promises. I handed them a copy of the letter. Not all of it, just the relevant parts. The parts about the test, about the monitoring, about the inheritance. Mom read it first. Her face went pale. She was watching us? A private investigator. For 3 years. He documented everything. Your visits to the cemetery. 0 for both of you. Dad's AA meetings. None. Mom's efforts to get Dad help. Nothing. Dad grabbed the letter. His eyes moved across the page, stopped, went back, started again. This says there's an inheritance, he said slowly. A substantial inheritance. From someone named Vivian Cordero. Keep reading. He did. I watched his face change. Confusion first, then disbelief, then something that looked like fear. This is insane, he whispered. This says my mother wasn't my mother. This says I was adopted. You were. Grandma's sister Vivian gave birth to you in 1962. Grandma raised you as her own. No one knew except Grandma and Grandpa. Not even Vivian's family. Mom looked between us. This can't be real. Eloise would have told us. She told me. I pulled out the photograph of Vivian, because I was the only one who kept my promise. I was the only one she trusted with the truth. Dad stared at the photograph. His hands were shaking. She looks like… He trailed off. She looks like me. I know. Genetics are strange. Mom stood up abruptly. I need water. She went to the sink, her back to us. I could see her shoulders shaking. What inheritance? Dad asked quietly. The letter mentions it but doesn't explain. A house in Monterey worth $2.4 million. Investment accounts worth $1.8 million. A vintage car collection. Antiques. Total value approximately $5 million. Dad's jaw dropped. Mom spun around from the sink. $5 million? Vivian watched you your whole life, I continued. She hired investigators just like Grandma did. She knew about your drinking. She knew about your failures. And she wrote her will with conditions. You could only inherit if you'd been sober for at least a year. The silence in the kitchen was absolute. You haven't been sober for a year, I said. You haven't been sober for 6 months. Mom texted me last week that you'd made it to 6 weeks. 6 weeks, Dad. After promising a dying woman you'd quit entirely. So what? His voice cracked. What happens now? The inheritance passes to your children, but only to children who demonstrate what Vivian called moral character worthy of the Cordero name. That means keeping promises. That means showing up. That means proving you mean what you say. Dad slumped in his chair. Daphne? Dropped out of nursing school her first semester. Broke her promise within months. Mom sat back down heavily. So the money goes to… me. I closed the folder. All of it. Because I was the only one in this family who actually meant what I said. The kitchen light hummed. Outside, a car drove past. Normal sounds for an abnormal moment. You can't keep it all, Dad finally said. His voice was weak, but there was an edge to it. That's not fair. I'm your father. You're the biological son of a woman you never knew, raised by a woman who lied to you your entire life. And you're an alcoholic who broke a deathbed promise. What's fair about any of this? Corinne. Mom's tone was pleading. We're family. Family shows up. Family keeps promises. Family doesn't make excuses while someone dies alone in a hospice room and then forget about them the moment the funeral ends. I stood up. I haven't decided what to do with the inheritance yet. Maybe I'll keep it all. Maybe I'll share some of it. But I'm not making any decisions tonight. And I'm not making them for you. I'm making them for me. I walked toward the door. You could help us. Dad's voice was barely audible. That money could change our lives. I turned back. That's the problem. The money won't change you. It'll just give you more resources to stay exactly the same. I left them sitting at the kitchen table, staring at the folder like it might explode. The drive home took an hour. I stopped at a gas station, bought a cup of terrible coffee, and sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I thought about calling my cousin Daphne. She'd want to know. She'd probably demand a share, but she'd also broken her promise, and she'd done it almost immediately. Grandma had asked her to finish nursing school, and Daphne had quit after one semester because it was too hard. I decided to wait. Tell her eventually, but not tonight. Tonight was for processing. My uncle was a different story. He'd promised to reconcile with his estranged son, my cousin Brendan, who'd moved to Portland 8 years ago after a fight nobody would explain to me. I'd always liked Brendan. He was quiet, thoughtful, the kind of person who remembered birthdays and asked real questions about your life. His father had cut him off completely, and no one seemed to know why. Maybe the inheritance gave me leverage. Maybe I could do what my uncle refused to do. I made a mental note to find Brendan's contact information. The next few weeks were chaos. My father called 12 times. I answered 3. Each conversation was worse than the last. He alternated between begging and threatening, convinced I was stealing his birthright. Mom called too. Softer in approach, but just as persistent. They wanted to see the full legal documents. They wanted to contest the will. They wanted to understand why Grandma had done this to them. I told them the truth. She'd done it because she knew them. She'd known them better than they knew themselves. Meanwhile, Marguerite walked me through the inheritance process. The house in Monterey needed to be inspected. The investment accounts needed to be transferred. The vintage cars were stored in a climate-controlled garage in Salinas, and I'd need to decide whether to keep them or sell. I flew to California on a Wednesday morning. The Monterey house was smaller than I'd expected, but beautiful. 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, and an ocean view that made my chest ache. Vivian had lived here alone for 30 years. Her furniture was still in place. Her books still lined the shelves. I walked through the room slowly, touching things. A ceramic vase on the windowsill, a faded quilt on the master bed, a kitchen drawer full of handwritten recipes in Spanish. In the living room, I found photographs, dozens of them. Vivian at different ages, always alone or with people I didn't recognize. But in the corner of the mantel, I found something that stopped my heart. A photograph of me, not recent, maybe 10 years old. I was standing outside my high school, backpack over one shoulder, squinting into the sun. I didn't remember anyone taking this picture. She'd been watching me, not just my father, me. I found more photos in a drawer. Me at my college graduation, me at what looked like a company picnic, me walking into Meadowbrook Cemetery with a bouquet of flowers. Vivian had known about me. She'd tracked me the same way she'd tracked my father. And somewhere along the line, she decided I was the one worth investing in. The storage unit in Salinas was even more overwhelming. Furniture, artwork, boxes of journals dating back decades. I opened one at random and found an entry from 2015. Watched the footage from the cemetery again. She brought tulips this time. Yellow ones. Eloise's favorite. The girl has more of me in her than anyone realizes. I wonder if she knows. She'd known about my visits before Grandma even asked me to make them. She'd been paying attention for years. I sat on the floor of the storage unit and cried. When I flew back home, I had a new understanding of what I'd inherited. Not just money, not just property. A legacy of watching. A tradition of testing people from the shadows to see who they really were. I wasn't sure I wanted it, but I couldn't pretend I didn't understand it. 3 months after my visit to Monterey, I finally called my uncle about Brendan. Why do you want his number? Uncle Mitchell sounded suspicious. We'd never been close. He was the kind of man who measured everything in transactions, always calculating what he'd gain or lose. I want to reconnect with him, I said simply. We were close when we were kids. That boy made his choices. He's not family anymore. Actually, I think he is. And I think Grandma would have wanted someone to reach out. That got his attention. Uncle Mitchell had inherited Grandma's house, but he'd also inherited her expectations, and he'd failed them spectacularly. Eloise would have understood, he said stiffly. Brendan disrespected the family. Some things can't be forgiven. What did he do? Silence. Then, that's none of your business. Fine, I'll find his information myself. It took me 2 days. Social media made everything easier. Brendan was living in Portland, working as a carpenter, married to a man named Theodore. That's when I understood. Uncle Mitchell hadn't disowned Brendan for disrespecting the family. He'd disowned him for being gay, for showing up at Thanksgiving with a boyfriend, for refusing to pretend he was something he wasn't. I messaged Brendan on Facebook. He responded within hours. Corinne, I honestly never expected to hear from anyone in the family again. What's going on? I didn't explain everything over message. I asked if we could talk. He gave me his phone number. That night I called and told him the whole story. Grandma's secondary will, Vivian's secret, the inheritance, his father's broken promise and my father's alcoholism and my own strange position as the only person who'd kept their word. Brendan listened without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. So let me get this straight. Great Aunt Vivian left millions to Uncle Richard, but he can't inherit because he's a drunk. The money goes to his kids instead, but Daphne broke her promise too. So you get everything. And now you're calling me because your father broke his promise. He was supposed to reconcile with you. He didn't. And I think that's wrong. You think it's wrong? I know it's wrong. He abandoned you because you're gay. That's not disrespecting the family. That's being yourself. Another long pause. What exactly are you proposing? I'm proposing that promises matter. Grandma asked your father to reconcile with you. He refused. But I can try to fix what he broke. Not for him, for you. Fix it how? This was the part I'd been thinking about for weeks. The part that kept me up at night. The inheritance is mine legally. I can do whatever I want with it. And what I want is to share it with people who deserve it. Not people who broke promises. Not people who performed grief. People who actually tried to be good. Brendan laughed softly. I haven't spoken to anyone in that family in 8 years. How do you know I've tried to be good? I don't. But I know you didn't break any promises. And I know your father wronged you. That counts for something. We talked for 2 more hours. By the end, I'd learned about his life in Portland. His husband, Theodore, was a physical therapist. They'd adopted a rescue dog named Gus. They were thinking about fostering kids. He'd built furniture for a children's hospital waiting room for free. He hadn't broken any promises because no one had given him the chance to make any. He'd been erased from the family before Grandma got sick. I want to give you a share of the inheritance, I said finally. You won't get what you would have gotten if your father had kept his promise. But you'll get something. Because that's what Grandma would have wanted if she'd known the full story. Brendan was crying. I could hear it through the phone. You don't have to do this. I know. That's why I'm doing it. I didn't tell anyone else. Not my parents, not Uncle Mitchell, not Daphne. The legal process took weeks. But Marguerite helped me set up a trust. Brendan received $500,000 and a portion of the investment accounts. He called me when the transfer went through. I don't know what to say. Say you'll visit Grandma's grave sometime. Bring something she would have liked. I will. And he did. 2 months later, Theodore texted me a photo. Brendan standing at Grandma's headstone holding a pot of yellow tulips. The family reunion happened in September, 6 months after I'd learned the truth. Uncle Mitchell hosted it at Grandma's old house, the one he'd inherited and immediately started renovating. Half the original character was already gone, replaced with modern fixtures and neutral paint. I almost didn't go. But something told me I needed to be there. Call it Vivian's gift. That ability to see through people, to sense when something important was about to happen. Everyone was there. Uncle Mitchell and his wife, Daphne and her new boyfriend. My parents, Dad white-knuckling a glass of sparkling cider while Mom hovered nearby like a nurse on suicide watch. Distant cousins I barely recognized, kids running through the yard. Nobody mentioned the inheritance directly, but I could feel it in every conversation. The way people looked at me, the questions they didn't ask. They all knew something had happened. They just didn't know the full story. Until Daphne cornered me in the kitchen. I heard about the money. Her voice was sharp. My mother told me. I'd wondered when this would happen. What did she tell you? That Grandma left some kind of secret will. That you inherited millions because you visited her grave and I didn't. That's one way of putting it. Daphne's eyes narrowed. I promised to finish nursing school. I tried. Do you know how hard that program is? The night shifts, the clinical rotations, the exams that don't curve even when everyone fails? I know it's hard. That's why Grandma asked you to finish it. She had no idea what she was asking. She knew exactly what she was asking. She asked us all to do difficult things. I drove an hour-and-a-half round trip every month for 3 years. That wasn't easy either. Daphne stepped closer. You're really going to keep millions of dollars because you bought some flowers? I'm going to keep millions of dollars because I kept my word. There's a difference. Her face twisted. For a moment, I saw the cousin I'd grown up with. The one who used to braid my hair and share secrets at sleepovers. Then I saw the woman she'd become, entitled and resentful and convinced the world owed her something. This isn't over, she said. Yes, it is. She stormed out. I poured myself a glass of water and went to find my parents. They were in the living room, Dad on the couch with his cider, Mom perched on the armrest beside him. They looked up when I approached. Can we talk outside? I asked. The backyard was quieter. Kids' voices faded into the distance. Dad sat on a patio chair, Mom standing beside him with her hand on his shoulder. I've made a decision about the inheritance, I said. Dad's jaw tightened. Mom's grip tightened too. I'm not sharing it with you, not the way you want me to. Dad started to speak. I held up my hand. But I'm also not abandoning you. You're still my parents. I still love you, and I want you to get better. Mom's eyes were wet. What does that mean? It means I'm paying for rehab, real rehab, a 90-day inpatient program in Arizona, the best facility I could. You go in next month, Dad. The deposit is already paid. Dad's face went through several emotions: anger, shame, something that might have been relief. And if I don't go, then nothing changes. You keep drinking, Mom keeps covering for you, and you never see a cent of the money. But if you go, if you actually try, I'll help with whatever comes next. Treatment, therapy, whatever you need to stay sober. Mom was crying now. Corinne, I don't know what to say. Don't say anything, just make sure he gets on the plane. I went back inside. The reunion continued around me, cousins laughing and kids shrieking and Uncle Mitchell grilling hamburgers like nothing had changed. But everything had changed. They just didn't know it yet. Dad went to rehab in October. 90 days in the Arizona desert, no phone, no visitors, no escape routes. Mom called me every week with updates from the family liaison. He was struggling. He was angry. He was finally dealing with things he'd buried for decades. By January, he was out, sober, shaky but sober. I flew home for his first week back. He looked different. Smaller somehow. Older. But his eyes were clear for the first time in years. I'm sorry, he said when we were alone. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I needed to say it. I know. I should have kept my promise to your grandmother. I should have done it years ago. You're doing it now. That counts. He looked at me for a long moment. Marguerite sent me a copy of the birth certificate. The one with Vivian's name. I'd asked her to do that. Part of my plan. I've been thinking about it a lot, he continued. My whole life feels like a lie. I don't know who I am anymore. You're the same person you've always been, just with more information. But all those stories Mom told me, the day I was born, the family traditions, none of it was real. The love was real. Grandma chose you. She raised you. She protected you for 60 years. That's more than most people get. He nodded slowly. I could see him processing, wrestling with truths he wasn't ready to accept. I want to see the house, he said finally. Vivian's house. Will you take me? We flew to Monterey 2 weeks later. I walked him through the rooms the same way I'd walked through them myself. He stood in the living room for a long time, staring at the photographs. She was watching me, he whispered. She was watching both of us. He found the photo of me at my high school, the one I'd found months ago. You look just like her. I know. He sat down on Vivian's couch. The furniture hadn't been changed. I was keeping the house exactly as it was, at least for now. I don't deserve any of this, he said. The house, the money, the truth. I broke my promise. I failed Mom. I failed Vivian. I failed you. You're still here. You're still trying. That's not failure. It's not success either. Maybe success isn't the point. Maybe the point is just showing up. He looked at me with Vivian's eyes, Grandma's eyes, his own eyes that I'd known my whole life. Is that what you did? Just showed up? I brought yellow tulips to a grave for 3 years. I sat on a bench and talked to a headstone. I didn't cure cancer or save the world. I just kept my promise. And that was enough. It was enough for Grandma. It was enough for Vivian. It's enough for me. We stayed in Monterey for 3 days. I showed him the storage unit, the vintage cars, the boxes of journals I still hadn't finished reading. He read a few entries from Vivian's diaries, learning about a woman who'd been erased from family history. On the last day, we drove to a cemetery in Pacific Grove. Marguerite had found Vivian's grave months ago, but I hadn't been ready to visit. It was a simple headstone, just her name and dates. No epitaph, no flowers. Dad stood in front of it for a long time. I wish I'd known her, he finally said. I think she wished that too. Do you think she forgave me? For not being sober? For not being the son she wanted? I thought about it. Really thought about it. I think she set up her will the way she did because she hadn't given up hope. She wanted you to have a chance. She just knew you might not take it. And you took it instead. I took what was offered, same as anyone would. He knelt down and placed his hand on the headstone. I couldn't hear what he whispered, but I saw his shoulders shake. I stepped back to give him privacy. When he finally stood, his face was wet but calm. Can we bring flowers next time? He asked. She deserves flowers. Yellow tulips. Yellow tulips. The year that followed was the strangest of my life. I sold 2 of the vintage cars and used the money to set up a scholarship fund in Vivian's name. The house in Monterey became a retreat, somewhere I flew to when city life got overwhelming. The investment accounts grew quietly in the background, enough to make me comfortable without making me careless. Dad stayed sober, 11 months and counting. He started going to therapy, actually talking about his feelings for the first time in his life. Mom stopped covering for him because there was nothing left to cover. They were both different people, or maybe the same people finally telling the truth. Uncle Mitchell never forgave me. He contested the will, lost, and stopped speaking to me entirely. Daphne did the same, convinced I'd stolen her birthright through technicalities. They weren't wrong about feeling cheated. They were just wrong about who had done the cheating. Brendan visited twice, once with Theodore, once with Gus, the rescue dog. We walked through Grandma's cemetery together, and I showed him the bench where I'd spent so many hours. He cried at her headstone. Theodore held his hand. Family isn't blood, Brendan said afterward. Family is who shows up. I thought about that a lot. On the 1-year anniversary of learning the truth, I went back to Meadowbrook Cemetery. Theodore, the groundskeeper, had retired, replaced by a younger woman named Ingrid who didn't know my history yet. I brought yellow tulips, same as always. The headstone looked the same, the bench looked the same, but I was different. I sat down and talked. I kept the house. I gave away some of the money. Dad's sober. Brendan's back in my life. Uncle Mitchell hates me, but he hated me before, so that's not really a change. A bird landed on a nearby branch. Not a sparrow this time. Something bigger. A mockingbird, maybe. I read the rest of Vivian's journals. She wrote about you a lot. About how you were the only person who ever understood her. About how much it cost to give you her son. About how she watched from a distance and wondered if she'd made the right choice. The wind picked up. I pulled my jacket tighter. I think she made the right choice. You raised a flawed man, but you raised him with love, and he raised me. And I'm trying to be better than both of you. Not better at succeeding, better at showing up. I placed the tulips against the headstone. I don't know if you can hear me. I don't know if any of this matters. But I'm going to keep coming. Every month, rain or shine. Because that's what I promised. I stood up to leave. And I keep my promises. The mockingbird sang as I walked back to my car. The cemetery gates closed behind me. Somewhere in Monterey, a house full of memories waited for my next visit. Somewhere in Portland, Brendan was building furniture for children who needed something beautiful. Somewhere in Arizona, my father was waking up sober for the 327th day in a row. And here I was, standing in a parking lot with dirt on my knees and tulip pollen on my hands, wondering what came next. I got in the car, started the engine, pulled out of the lot. What came next was whatever I decided. That was Vivian's real gift. Not the money, not the house, not the truth about my family. The gift was choice, the power to shape what happened next. I drove home thinking about yellow tulips, about stubborn old women who tested their families from beyond the grave, about promises that mattered and promises that didn't. I thought about my father, finally sober, finally facing himself. I thought about my mother, finally honest, finally standing on her own. I thought about Brendan, finally welcomed back, finally seen. And I thought about myself, the granddaughter who kept her word, the one who showed up, the heir to a fortune built on secrets and conditional love. It wasn't a fairy tale. Nobody lived happily ever after, but we lived honestly. We lived with our choices out in the open, where they could be judged. Grandma would have approved, Vivian would have approved, and that was enough. 2 months later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, Monterey postmark. Inside was a photograph I'd never seen before. Vivian and Grandma together, young and laughing, their arms around each other on what looked like a summer afternoon. They couldn't have been older than 20, before the secrets, before the pregnancy, before the 60 years of silence. On the back, someone had written, "The truth doesn't destroy families. Lies do. You broke the cycle." She would be proud. I didn't know who sent it. Maybe another relative from Vivian's side who'd finally come forward. Maybe a friend who'd kept Vivian's secrets. Maybe someone who'd been watching from the shadows, the same way Vivian had watched all of us. I framed the photograph and put it on my desk. Every morning, I looked at two young women who didn't know what was coming. Two sisters who would spend their lives keeping and revealing secrets. Two halves of a family that wouldn't exist without their choices. I kept visiting the cemetery. Every month, yellow tulips. Theodore's replacement, Ingrid, started recognizing me too. She'd wave from her cart and leave me in peace. Some things don't change. Some things change everything. And some things, like a promise to a dying woman, turn out to be worth more than anyone expected. Even $5 million. The last time I talked to my father about the inheritance, we were sitting on the porch of Vivian's house watching the sunset. He'd been sober for 18 months, long enough to prove it wasn't a phase. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what you did, paying for rehab, not giving me the money, making me earn something for once. You didn't earn the sobriety. You chose it. Same thing, isn't it?" I considered. "Maybe. I'm not going to thank you. That feels too simple. But I want you to know I understand now. Why Grandma set it up the way she did. Why she gave you the power instead of any of us. Tell me." He turned to face me. His eyes were clear. Still Vivian's eyes. Still Grandma's eyes. But seeing things differently now. "Because you were the only one she trusted to do the right thing. Not the easy thing. Not the profitable thing. The right thing." "Did I do the right thing?" He smiled. The first real smile I'd seen from him in years. "You did exactly what she would have done. Exactly what Vivian would have done. You tested us. You gave us chances. And you let the results speak for themselves." That sounds manipulative when you say it like that. Manipulation is when you lie. You told us the truth. You just made us deal with it. The sun dropped below the horizon. The ocean turned from gold to purple to black. "I'm glad you're sober," I said. "I'm glad you kept your promise." We sat there until the stars came out. Two people who shared blood and history and secrets, finally able to sit together without the weight of lies between us. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't forgiveness. It was just presence. Two people showing up for each other at the end of a long journey. Grandma would have approved, Vivian would have smiled, and somewhere in Meadowbrook Cemetery, a headstone covered in yellow tulips stood guard over the woman who had started it all, the woman who had tested us, the woman who had waited 3 years to see who we really were, the woman who had known, even at the end, that promises matter, that showing up matters, that the person who visits your grave is the person who deserves your trust. I visit every month, rain or shine, yellow tulips in hand, and every time I sit on that bench, I swear I can hear her voice. "Thank you, Corinne. Thank you for keeping your word. I keep my promises." That's what she taught me. That's what Vivian left me. That's what the inheritance really meant. Not money, not property, not secrets finally revealed. Just the knowledge that integrity has value, that consistency matters, that the person who shows up is the person worth trusting. I think about that every time I buy yellow tulips, every time I make the drive, every time I sit on that bench and talk to a headstone. Some people inherit houses, some people inherit fortunes, some people inherit nothing but debt and disappointment. I inherited the responsibility to tell the truth, and I intend to keep it.